It's official. This is a murder investigation. This is a suspected murder. Lynette Hooker is no longer missing in, a criminal investigation. This is a suspected murder investigation. My sources have confirmed this for me. And let me tell you something else. I think Brian knows it. And the reason I think Brian knows it, Brian Hooker, if you're watching, the TikTok is catching up with you. And I think maybe you're watching this podcast because he's hired himself a new lawyer. I always suspected that the one he had before, the one that he got in Michigan, when he did his quick trip back to Michigan and was seen by our spies, that one might not have been ready for prime time, because this new lawyer is former DOJ. So now I think Brian suspects he might be having to fight a federal battle and needed a federal lawyer, somebody who had some background in, federal litigation. So the TikTok getting closer and closer and closer. And when I say that, by the time you see this podcast, the Coast Guard cutter Margaret Norval is going to be heading out first thing Tuesday morning. And so those dive teams could actually be in the water by Tuesday evening. I suspect, though, actually, that the Coast Guard cutter's 154 feet. That's big. It's like, if you're not really familiar with ships or yachts and you watch Below Deck, now you're getting into Below Deck yacht category with length, but it is not fancy like Below Deck. It has everything on it. Like, it's got a galley, it's got dining facilities, it's got sleeping facilities, but it's not made for comfort. It's made for military styled work, because this is the Coast Guard, right? It's a branch of the military. And so it's got a crew of, I think, 24 people. It can travel at 35 knots. It will probably travel around 20 knots. That's kind of the kind of cruising speed that isn't going to just guzzle the gas. It's very expensive to drive these vessels, right? Especially with fuel where it is right now. Thanks a bunch. But they're also going to have on board a dive team and members of CGIS. I've been talking a lot about CGIS, Coast Guard Investigative Service. Can I just scream this from the rooftop? This is not the FBI. I don't know what's going on with these other media outlets that keep saying the FBI, the FBI. The FBI is not doing this. This is entirely a Coast Guard investigation. Coast Guard Investigative Services, CGIS. They do stuff like this all the time. They actually in the 70s were ordered down to Antarctica to arrest a guy for a shooting down there because they were the ones that had the jurisdiction. I'm going to talk about that a little later on in this podcast, because jurisdiction is so important with the case of Brian Hooker and Lynette Hooker that we can now make certain assumptions as to where Lynette likely died. So there's a couple things that lead us to soulmate. First, Brian's full of shit. That we know. So we can now extrapolate that Lynette was probably killed on board Soulmate. I think they got that dinghy back to Soulmate. There was no bounced off the back and I floated and ended up on Marsh Harbor. All of that is bullshit. We have GPS data that shows he was in places he shouldn't have been, doing things that you don't do if you don't have propulsion, right? If you don't have propulsion and you're just floating, you're floating with the wind and the waves, and you're ending up on a beach or a rocky shore somewhere. You're not doing the things that Brian was doing, and his GPS shows it, right? Anyway, there's also this notion of jurisdiction. Coast Guard, United States Coast Guard, has jurisdiction over cases like this when a U.S. citizen, or actually any person, is killed on board a U.S. vessel. Soulmate was a U.S. vessel, registered in Florida. So Coast Guard has jurisdiction when someone is killed on board a U.S. flagged vessel. Soulmate was a U.S. flagged vessel.
She bought a ticket home, March 11th, a way out, a new life waiting on the other side of fear. She never made it. Somewhere in the dark waters of the Bahamas, A woman vanished from the back of a small boat in the middle of the night. No distress call, no search launched until morning. Just a husband who walked out of the shadows hours later, calm, unhurried, checking his watch like a man with nowhere to be and nothing to worry about. What happened on that water? And why does every single piece of evidence keep pointing back to the same man? Before we go further, this case contains details involving alleged domestic violence and the suspected death of a woman who deserved far better. If that is sensitive for you, please take care of yourself first. If you are new here, welcome to Cold Case 007. Hit subscribe right now because this story moves fast and you do not want to miss a single update. Drop your city and country in the comments below. Like this video, share it, and let us get into it. Lynette Hooker was 55 years old. She was from Onsted, a small town in Lenawee County, Michigan. By all accounts, she was a devoted mother, a woman who loved the water, and someone who had built her life around the people she cared about most. Her husband, Brian Hooker, was 59. The two had been married for approximately 25 years. They did not live in a house. They lived on a sailboat, a U.S.-registered vessel out of Florida called the Soulmate. It was their home, their lifestyle, and the center of their world together. In early April 2026, the Hookers were on a sailing trip through the Abacos in the Bahamas, anchored near Elbow Cay and Hopetown. On the evening of April 4th, Lynette was seen alive at the Abaco Inn. That was the last confirmed sighting of her by anyone outside of Brian Hooker. According to Brian, the two of them boarded their small 8-foot dinghy that night to make the ride back to the Soulmate. He told investigators that somewhere along that route, Lynette went overboard. He said the engine safety lanyard was on her when she fell, which cut power to the motor immediately. He claimed he saw her swimming towards shore. He said the current pulled them apart. He told police he had no way to restart the engine and was forced to paddle for hours before finally reaching land. That is his account, stated once, in full. At 3:35 in the morning on Easter Sunday, Brian Hooker appeared at Marsh Harbor Boatyard. Surveillance cameras were rolling. He was not running. He was not calling out. He was not showing any visible sign of a man who had just spent hours adrift after watching his wife disappear into dark water. Jim Todd and the team from Hopetown Volunteer Fire and Rescue responded that morning. 4 rescuers made contact with Brian. What they observed was a man who was composed, unhurried, and who did not immediately raise the alarm about a missing wife. Lynette's daughter, Carly Aylesworth, had 3 questions the moment she heard Brian's story. Why didn't he drop anchor and search for her mother in the water? Why didn't he use the Soulmate's thermal camera, a piece of equipment worth $33,000, to scan the surface for her? And why, if his wife had just gone overboard, did he paddle in the opposite direction? 3 questions. No answers yet. Subscribe to Cold Case 007. This case moves fast, and we are covering every development as it happens. Lynette Hooker was not just a name in a missing persons report. She was a mother, a daughter, a woman who loved being on the water, even as that same life on the water became something she was trying to escape. Her daughter, Carly Aylesworth, has been one of the most consistent public voices in this case since the moment her mother went missing. Carly has spoken to CNN, to investigators, and to anyone willing to listen. She has not stopped pushing. The picture she paints of her mother is someone warm, someone loved, and someone who was caught in a cycle that the people closest to her could see clearly but felt powerless to break. Lynette's mother, Darlene Hamlet, watched that cycle for years. According to reporting, Darlene did not simply stand by. She actively reached out to battered women's shelters, consulting with advocates to find better ways to help Lynette leave. She begged her daughter to go. Lynette would leave, and then she would go back. That pattern repeated itself more than once. Darlene never stopped trying. Lynette's friend, Marnie Stevenson, has also spoken publicly. As of the latest reporting, Stevenson says she is still holding out hope. She has urged the public and media to give investigators the space to work, stating that answers will come if the investigation is allowed to move forward without constant interference. The marriage itself, by Carly's own description, was volatile. Approximately 25 years together, and Carly has been direct about the fact that things became especially unstable when alcohol was involved. In January 2026, just 3 months before Lynette vanished, she told Carly something that now carries significant weight. She told her daughter that Brian had threatened to throw her off the boat during an argument. That was the first documented time a threat involving water had been recorded within this relationship. It was not the first time the relationship had come to the attention of law enforcement. In February 2015, Kentwood, Michigan police responded to a domestic incident involving the couple. Both accused each other of assault. Brian was found with a bloody nose. Lynette alleged that he had choked her. She was the one arrested on charges of assault and battery. The warrant was later denied due to insufficient evidence as to who initiated the altercation. Further back, in December 2005, Kentwood police documented a separate child abuse investigation under complaint number 19919-05. Child witnesses reported that Brian became enraged during a home argument, chased a child upstairs, pinned the child against a door, and placed both hands around the child's neck. The case was referred to the Michigan Family Independence Agency. Detective Michelle Clark documented additional witness accounts in supplemental reporting. Brian was eventually acquitted at trial. His defense argued the children's memories had been implanted. 2 weeks before she disappeared, Lynette Hooker bought a ticket home, dated March 11th. She had a plan to leave. What happened between March 11th and April 4th is exactly what this investigation is trying to answer. Brian Hooker told investigators a story about rough seas, strong winds, and a current that pulled his wife away before he could reach her. There was just one problem. The weather that night did not cooperate with that version of events. Coast Guard data showed that conditions in the area on the night of April 4th did not match the dangerous seas Brian described. The wind, the waves, the current he claimed made rescue impossible. The data did not support it. That was the first crack. The second came from Brian's own electronic devices. GPS data extracted from at least one of those devices told a story that was completely different from the one he gave investigators. The device showed movement out onto the Sea of Abaco. It showed stops. Then it showed a return. The pattern of movement recorded on that device did not align with a man who was drifting helplessly without engine power, at the mercy of wind and current. It showed deliberate navigation, purposeful stops in specific locations, then a return to shore. Brian had also submitted his own maps to investigators. He handed over what he claimed was the dinghy's route and the location where Lynette went overboard. Investigators, who later compared those maps to the independent forensic GPS data, found they were pointing to entirely different areas. Based on Brian's account and his submitted maps, search teams had been looking in the wrong place. That confirmation came directly from officials familiar with the investigation. The surveillance footage from Marsh Harbor Boatyard added another layer. Multiple cameras captured Brian's arrival at 3:35 that morning. The Daily Mail reviewed footage and reported on his calm, casual approach to the boatyard fence. Cold Case 007 sources with direct knowledge of that footage provided additional detail. Brian was wearing a blue Hawaiian-style shirt, blue slides, and a cowboy-style hat. He was carrying a yellow dry bag. He checked his watch not once, but multiple times. He moved through shadowed areas of the yard, appearing unaware that light was catching him from certain angles. In his left hand was an object that sources describe as a dark tablet-like device. That object was not observed in his possession when Hopetown Volunteer Fire and Rescue arrived and took him aboard their vessel shortly after. Where did it go? No official answer has been provided. On April 8th, 4 days after Lynette vanished, the Royal Bahamas Police Force arrested Brian Hooker. His Bahamian attorney, Terrell A. Butler, confirmed he had been cooperating fully with investigators and described the arrest as shocking. After 5 days of questioning, Brian was released on April 13th without charges. Bahamian Police Commissioner Shanta Knowles was direct in stating that Brian Hooker remained a suspect. Shortly after his release, Brian left the Bahamas and returned to the United States, with his legal team citing a visit to his ailing mother as the reason. Brian issued a public statement. He said he was heartbroken over what he called a boat accident in unpredictable seas. He said the winds and currents drove them apart despite desperate attempts to reach her. He told NBC News directly, "I've never harmed Lynette, and I would never harm Lynette, and I want to find Lynette." The soulmate was seized by authorities and impounded. It would not stay in the Bahamas for long. And that is when things started going wrong for Brian Hooker's version of events. When a case like this crosses international waters, the first question that has to be answered is who has the authority to investigate. That answer matters enormously here because there has been consistent confusion in media coverage about which agency is leading this case. It is not the FBI. The agency driving this investigation is the United States Coast Guard and its investigative division, known as CGIS, Coast Guard Investigative Service. The FBI is involved in a supporting forensic capacity, but jurisdiction belongs to the Coast Guard. The reason is straightforward. The soulmate was a U.S.-registered vessel out of Florida. Under federal law, the United States Coast Guard holds investigative authority over cases involving U.S.-flagged vessels regardless of where those vessels are located. The Bahamian government formally granted permission for U.S. assets to enter Bahamian territorial waters to conduct the search. That cooperation between the two governments opened the door for what came next. The Coast Guard cutter, Margaret Norvell, arrived in Marsh Harbor on Tuesday. She is a 154-foot fast response cutter carrying a crew of approximately 24. She is not a luxury vessel. She is a working military asset built for exactly this kind of operation, equipped with a galley, sleeping quarters, and every operational tool needed for an extended maritime search. What she brought with her matters just as much as the vessel itself. On board was a specialized dive team, ready to search previously unchecked areas of the Sea of Abaco. She also carried a rigid inflatable boat, known as a RIB, with a hard hull and inflatable gunnels designed for fast water deployment, allowing the dive team to reach multiple locations quickly. Also on board was an ROV, a remotely operated underwater vehicle capable of scanning the seafloor in areas too deep or too complex for divers alone. And then there was Maggie. Maggie is a cadaver detection dog from Broward County Sheriff's Office. Her handler is Chris. What makes Maggie remarkable in this specific case is her documented capability to detect decomposition oils that rise to the water's surface from significant depth, allowing her to alert on the water itself, not just on land. Maggie had previously searched the Soulmate. However, she has not yet been able to search the dinghy. That vessel has remained in the custody of the Royal Bahamas Police Force. It has been stored outdoors and exposed to rain for over 7 weeks, which investigators acknowledge is a concern for any remaining scent evidence. Whether the rain has compromised that potential evidence is a question that can only be answered once Maggie gets access. The search zones themselves are being driven directly by the GPS forensic data. The primary focus area is the eastern shore of Marsh Harbour, specifically south of the location where Brian claims he came ashore, an area Maggie has not previously covered. Investigators are also looking closely at the Tulu Cut area, where a local contact named Dean Zamzow identified a specific zone reaching depths of 40 feet, the kind of depth that becomes relevant when investigators are considering how evidence or a body might have been concealed beneath the surface. All digital evidence recovered from the scene has been sent to FBI facilities in Quantico, Virginia, for full forensic processing. The Coast Guard leads the investigation. The FBI supports the science. There is one more detail about Brian Hooker that investigators have not overlooked. Before this case, Brian worked for AT&T. He was fired, not once, but after multiple documented attempts for manipulating the GPS tracking system on his company work van. His co-workers reported that he made their working lives difficult and that interfering with company systems appeared to be a pattern of behavior rather than an isolated incident. For investigators now working to untangle GPS data at the center of a suspected murder case, that history is not a footnote. Brian has also made a legal move that signals he understands what may be coming. He has hired a new US-based attorney with a background in federal litigation at the Department of Justice level. His previous Bahamian counsel handled the initial arrest and release. This new appointment suggests Brian is preparing for a fight that goes well beyond the Bahamas. If you are new here, subscribe to Cold Case 007. We cover cases like this from the first report all the way to the verdict. The Soulmate is no longer in the water. Authorities hauled the vessel out and placed it in dry dock, removing it entirely from the marine environment to allow forensic teams to conduct a full examination of the boat's interior and exterior without the complications of it being afloat. That process is currently underway. The way the vessel is being handled, secured, documented, and preserved points directly toward one possibility. This boat is being treated as potential trial evidence. The focus of that forensic examination is not the deck, it is what happened below it. Investigators are working with the understanding that if anything occurred on board the Soulmate, it most likely happened in the interior of the vessel, below deck, away from open water, and away from any possibility of being seen or heard by anyone on nearby boats or shore. The Sea of Abaco has other vessels anchored in it. The Soulmate's deck is exposed. Below deck is a different environment entirely. It is enclosed, it is private, and it is exactly where forensic teams are concentrating their efforts. One item connected to Lynette has never been recovered: her pink dive weight belt. Lynette was a diver. She owned a pink weight belt used for diving, and that belt has not been found on the Soulmate, in the dinghy, or anywhere in the search area. Investigators have noted its absence as significant. A weight belt is a dense, heavy object. In the context of a body disposal at sea, its absence carries a specific investigative weight that officials have not dismissed. The dinghy itself is also undergoing forensic scrutiny. It is an 8-foot vessel powered by an electric motor. Electric motors of that size operate on limited battery capacity. At higher speeds, the battery drains faster. At lower speeds, it lasts longer but covers less distance. Forensic mapping of what that dinghy could physically have done in a single night, given its battery range, is a critical piece of the puzzle. It puts hard boundaries on where Brian could and could not have traveled, and it gives investigators a science-based framework for evaluating his claims against what was actually possible. On the digital side, the full scope of Brian's recovered devices is still being processed at FBI facilities in Quantico. The GPS extraction that has already been completed produced new search zones and contradicted his stated route. But that is not the complete picture. Investigators have confirmed that additional data from those devices is still being analyzed. What else those devices contain has not yet been made public. A former prosecutor who reviewed the publicly known facts of this case went on record with a clear assessment. In a no-body murder case, when the last known person with the victim is demonstrably telling a version of events that the forensic evidence contradicts, that person faces a serious evidentiary problem. A body is not required for a prosecution to move forward. What is required is enough evidence to prove beyond reasonable doubt what happened. Lying about the circumstances surrounding a disappearance when you are the only witness is not a minor inconsistency. It is the foundation of a case. The soulmate has since been moved from its initial impound location in the Bahamas to a secured facility in Florida. That move brings the primary piece of physical evidence onto American soil, within direct reach of federal investigators and federal prosecutors. As of this documentary, several critical pieces remain outstanding. Lynette's body has not been recovered. Her personal devices have not been publicly accounted for. The pink weight belt remains missing. The full forensic report on the soulmate has not been released, and Maggie has not yet completed her examination of the dinghy. Every piece of outstanding evidence ties back to one location, the soulmate, and one person who was on it. Subscribe and hit the bell. When this case breaks, we will be the first to cover it. Like this video to help more people find Lynette's story. As of the date of this documentary, no charges have been filed. Brian Hooker is a free man living in the United States, but the machinery of a federal investigation is moving, and it is moving in one direction. United States officials confirmed to CBS News that this case is now being investigated as a possible foreign murder of a U.S. national. That is not a casual designation. That language carries specific legal weight and signals that federal prosecutors are actively considering what a criminal case could look like. The Coast Guard has been careful with its public statements, confirming an ongoing criminal investigation while stopping short of formally declaring it a murder case. That distinction matters procedurally, but it does not change what investigators are working toward. Royal Bahamas Police Commissioner Shanta Knowles has been consistent. Brian Hooker remains a suspect. That has not changed since the moment Lynette was reported missing. He was detained, questioned, released, and watched. His movements since returning to the United States have not gone unnoticed. The attorney Brian hired after returning to the U.S. is not a general practice lawyer. This is someone with a background in federal litigation at the Department of Justice level. That choice tells investigators and prosecutors something important. Brian Hooker is not preparing for a local Bahamian legal matter. He is preparing for a federal one. What that federal case could look like is already well established in American law. The United States government holds jurisdiction over crimes committed aboard U.S.-flagged vessels, regardless of where those vessels are located in the world. Federal prosecutors also hold authority when a U.S. citizen is killed in a foreign country. The soulmate was U.S. registered. Lynette Hooker was a U.S. citizen. Either basis alone gives federal prosecutors a clear legal path forward. A body is not required to bring charges. What is required is sufficient evidence, and that evidence is still being gathered, processed, and analyzed. Carly Aylesworth has not gone quiet. Lynette's daughter continues to speak publicly, continues to push for answers, and continues to make sure her mother's name stays in front of the people who have the power to act. She has given interviews, cooperated with investigators, and refused to let this case fade into the background noise of the news cycle. Darlene Hamlet, Lynette's mother, has carried this with a grief that started long before April 4th. She watched her daughter stay in a difficult situation for years. She made calls to shelters. She begged. She strategized. She tried everything a mother could try. And now she is pushing authorities with the same energy, demanding that the investigation move forward and that her daughter receives justice. Marnie Stevenson, Lynette's friend, has one message for the public. Let the investigators work. Give them the space to build the case properly. The answers are coming, she says, if the process is allowed to run its course without constant interference. That leaves us with Lynette herself. Not as a case number, not as a headline, but as a 55-year-old woman from Onstead, Michigan, who loved her daughter, who had a mother who fought for her, who had friends who stood by her, and who, at some point in the weeks before she vanished, decided she had had enough. She bought a ticket. She set a date. March 11th, she made a plan. That plan never happened, but it tells you everything about who Lynette Hooker was. She was not someone who had given up. She was someone who was trying to find her way out. The water is still being searched. The evidence is still being processed. And for everyone who loved Lynette Hooker, every single day without an answer is one day too many. If this case matters to you, subscribe to Cold Case 007 right now. Hit the like button. Share this video with someone who needs to know Lynette's name. And drop your location in the comments below, because this community spans the entire world, and every single one of you helps keep stories like this one alive. We will be here when this case breaks. Make sure you are too.